Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Rosalia Karanja, founder, and today marks a bold step into a new conversation we believe Africa must lead. For the past few days, we've been breaking down carbon markets, carbon credits, carbon assets, unpacking the hits, the misses, the benefits, and the alternatives. And now the time has come. Our very first live conversation is happening, streaming right now on LinkedIn and YouTube via at Square One Eco Africa, powered by Restream. Tonight's discussion, Africa, real benefits, missed opportunities, and alternatives. This is part of our series, hashtag the Africa. This conversation isn't just about experts, it's about you. Joining us tonight are brilliant voices from across Africa. From Ethiopia, we'll be joined by Abiot Yismo. He's an environmental and social impact assessment consultant and renewable energy specialist. From Kenya, we have Pauline Muyodi, an environmental planning and management student at Kenyatta University, a GIS mapping and climate storytelling advocate, and I think it's safe to call her a Gen Z. She'll tell us. And also from Kenya, we are joined by Dixon Nayenoi, an indigenous youth leader, a conservationist, a community liaison officer at Nyekweri Kimintet Community Forest Trust. He might correct me or not, but yeah, we'll talk about that later on. All the way from West Africa, we have Adejo Opanachi. He's an artist, a founder of Guardians of Sustainability, a Mayama Recycling Company Limited. And last but not you, our audience from across Africa, this conversation can't happen without you. Your voice matters. Your comments and insights will help shape the Africa we want. If you'd like to engage live, drop your questions or thoughts in the comments. We'll be sampling them throughout the conversation. Want to join us on video? Ask in the chat and I'll share a link. But note, we have limited space, a maximum of 10 people at a time, so please bear with us. But before we dive in, a quick word about Square One Eco Africa. Square One Eco Africa is a community organization based in Kenya and working across sub-Saharan Africa. We are committed to tackling the urgent challenges of climate change, food insecurity, environmental degradation, and gender inequality through innovation, inclusive, and locally driven solutions. Our approach is grounded in community-led values, centering the voices of communities in co-creating systems that build resilience, restore ecosystems, and spark sustainable livelihoods. We blend community knowledge with cutting-edge technology and documentary storytelling to create models of change that are not only replicable, but scalable. Follow us on TikTok, IG, LinkedIn platforms on at Square One Eco Africa, and on X is on at S1 Eco Africa. We shall also share our WhatsApp community link on the comment section for you to join. The hashtags tonight, hashtag our carbon, our terms, hashtag carbon credits justice, hashtag the Africa we must build. Let me ask you this. If Africa produces 25% of the world's carbon credits, why are we only receiving 2% of the revenue potential? Question to ponder. And these questions, we shall break them down together. Grab a coffee, a tea, a plate of food, or just settle in and let's build the Africa we deserve. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of our topic of discussion tonight, to our speakers who have already joined us, I have a question, our beginning question. I'll start with you, Adejo.
Sorry, come again.
What are carbon, if we may, to be in our conversation tonight?
Okay. Carbon, the people who help quantify, evaluate, and give reports for carbon credits. Thank you.
You have been very quick with your response, but I know that you have a lot to say as the conversation continues. Same our in-house Gen Z, what are carbon markets in your own understanding?
Carbon markets are a permit that allows a company, country, or organization to emit 1 ton of carbon dioxide or the equivalent in other greenhouse gases.
Carbon markets. So how do we then connect carbon markets with carbon credits, carbon assets? I want us to break it down a bit more for our listeners and viewers tonight, so that when we get into the actual conversation, we at least have an understanding of exactly what this means. Adejo, if you might, I'm coming back. And before you speak, I would also want to mention that I'd already joined us, but he's having some technical hitches. Once he's up, he's going to join us. And we're still waiting for Abiot to also join us. So Adejo, please take it away.
Okay, yeah. A carbon credit is, like Pauline said, the equivalent of a ton of CO2, which is prevented from being admitted back into the atmosphere. So there are organizations who invest in decarbonization with the removal of CO2. So carbon credits of the atmosphere, and these organizations help us to document, track. We have examples in Nigeria, like what's the name of the app again? Waste. There's a Waste Africa app where people use to track the carbon credits which is removed from the atmosphere. Thank you.
Thank you, Adejo, for telling us the side of the credits and the organizations that come on board and buy the carbon assets. Pauline, what are carbon assets so that people can understand how credits come to buy assets?
Carbon assets are basically the valuable climate
Pauline, can you
goods
hear me?
that can be. Yes.
Okay, continue, sorry.
I was saying carbon assets are basically the valuable climate goods that can be measured, certified, and traded in carbon markets. So you can think of them as the climate-friendly products that generates carbon credits, which can then be sold as financial assets. And I think they are called assets because they hold monetary value and can be sold or bought, used for climate claims, or traded like stocks and commodities.
So when we talk about now the assets, I think it's also nice for our audience to understand that these assets here in Africa are in form of forests, in form of carbon sinks. They are called ground, grass. So all that is carbon assets. And then now the credits, as Adejo, are what other organizations, it might be organizations put out as a way to indicate that they are going to purchase this far or this much in terms of the assets, so that whenever there is pollution going on, these assets are the ones that are sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We remember geography and science when we were in primary school. I know all of us across Africa have done education in primary. I used to be told that trees absorb carbon dioxide, and so that are the carbon assets basically or simply do so. It's carbon credits now buying or buying the carbon assets, which are our forests and our ground and other conservations and conservancies. And that is why we are having this conversation tonight, because the questions that we are asking is, are our communities in Africa getting the real benefit from these carbon credits that we're talking about? Are there opportunities that we can speak of that maybe we have missed out? And are there alternatives so that Africans and Africa can be able to reap as much as they should from the carbons? Because we had talked about Africa producing over 25% of the globe. So are they getting the real benefit vis-a-vis that are being given out? And that is just to set the stage for our conversation. I mentioned that if you have any comments, any thoughts, put them down on our comment section. We shall be sampling them as we continue. And if you would want to be part of this, be part of the guest, put down your name and I'll share with you the link. And also remember that we get to host as a maximum of 10 speakers at a time. Let me get into now the actual thing. And this focus, I will begin with focusing the Nigerian emerging carbon market. And I know we will talk about emission trading scheme that has already been launched in Nigeria. And before we get into that, Adejo, we talk about real benefits versus greenwashing, and we will define what, or you can define for us a bit of what greenwashing is. Does Nigeria risk replicating oil era inequalities in its new carbon credit market? You can also expand a bit on what I mean by oil errors, because we all know that Nigeria is a superpower country when it comes to oil. It would be nice to also see how that one speaks to the new regulations in Nigeria. Adeju?
Okay, let me start from greenwashing. I think greenwashing refers to companies who false or falsify information which they give to their supply chain on on their claims on how they handle on how they handle their recyclables, for instance. So linking it down to Nigeria, I would say the oil era. What you meant by the oil era was the crude oil injustice we've been facing in Nigeria, and how the wealth has not been properly used by the government, and due to the lack of proper infrastructure in place, there has been improper use of the resources which has been generated from that sector. So what you meant by not repeating itself again in this situation is, if carbon credits are to come to Nigeria and big investors are to come to Nigeria, for instance, and there are no proper infrastructure in place, or it won't get to the youth or like the people in communities like Bodo, Goy in the Niger Delta, which have been affected by the crude oil spillages, and for other which have had very bad environmental impacts due to companies or factories that are located there. So if the youths are allowed to take or have a voice in the decision makings, and everyone who is affected down to the grassroots is allowed to have voice in decision making and the policies making, I believe properly distributed among the people and among everyone, which is what we are aiming to do. So we should strive towards making an inclusive policy, which would rope everyone in. Thank you.
Adejo, and you've talked about youth, and you're talking about if to speak up. Let me, because everybody in Africa now is youth, and we are all identifying as Gen Zs. I'm sorry if I step on someone who doesn't want. This is just on a light note. But the conversation continues, as you mentioned, that if youth raise their voice and think should happen, and the injustices that you people saw when, or rather Nigerians saw through the crude oil era, and now we are talking about carbon markets, and it's an era of carbon markets. And I know Africa, we have continued mentioning that this is our green gold. Then there's this conversation of greenwashing. But then you've mentioned a very pertinent group, the youth. And because I had mentioned that here we have our Pauline in Kenya, we have seen youth being mobilized and Kenyans being mobilized for tree planting. But then when it comes to the actual financial benefits of this, we are getting stories. And I had a privilege when we were sharing the breakdown of carbon markets through our handles at Square One Eco Africa. We had a privilege of sharing a documentary that painted a picture of exactly what is happening on ground. What has been promised vis-a-vis what gets to ground is different. Then now there is this additional group that is called the youth. Pauline, what would we say the youth can do to ensure that this carbon market conversation, as it hits on the ground, it has their voice, and then this carbon market conversation is involving and including them in the table of discussion. And also you can tie it down to what Adejo has talked about, the youth missing out when it comes to speaking up on the carbon market space.
Okay, thank you. And I think that real change demands that we provide Kenyan youth with direct formal access to carbon registries, robust legal protection in contract negotiations, and mandatory ownership stakes in carbon projects. And this will ensure that the environmental benefits they cultivate translate into tangible economic empowerment, fostering genuine trust and sustainable development. And the youth in Kenya and globally are currently the ones that are more creative and energetic enough to be out there with these carbon projects, and involving them will foster great results in the future and the present.
Nice that you've also mentioned job. And I know we all know, or if we don't, that youth a bigger population, or rather they are a bigger population in Africa compared to other. Do I call them generations, or do I call them? Let me call them generations for this discussion. So, youth, they are the majority. And then when you talk about youth, you're talking about people who are between teen and 35. So these are people who are ripe for the job market. But then now we are talking about so many people, a bigger population, ripe for the job market, but when it comes to jobs, there is no job. And here we're talking about the entry of carbon markets, the entry of this very nice green gold for Africa. And you've talked about now it's about time we also saw the creation of those job opportunities. In your perspective, Adejo, as an MD and innovator in circular economy, and innovator where you're bringing together people to do something, what did you say about including this majority group that is the youth, and what would you say in terms of opening up these carbon markets in terms of education to this youth group that you talked about, and this youth group that Paulina talked about in terms of being the group that is getting into the job market, and these job markets not being very, it comes to them?
I think one of the best ways to to bring it into our Nigerian system would be through the recycling industry, for instance. We could have initiatives, recovery for PET bottles, where people are paid in carbon credits. People get the equivalent of the carbon credit worth for the PET bottles they bring to the recycle banks or recycle hubs, and this can really help passing down the value of the carbon credit and tracking it through these companies. For instance, the company I was trying to mention before was Packham. On Packham, for instance, you can register as a collector, earn your carbon credits on Packham as a collector, and they are one of the people who are actually doing it here in Nigeria already. So I believe if investors are willing to invest in organizations like that who can track and properly pass it to the youths and make sure the resources are gotten down at the grassroots, I think it can work. Thank you.
And I'm able to, or we have spaces where we can raise this dejo, and so that we can also speak to the youth and tell them that you think recycling bit and this. As we continue to talk about carbon markets involving now the youth and an opportunity for them to be part of this green gold that is carbon markets, we kept on putting information on how where we are at since the onset of carbon markets back in the 90s and 2000s, and now when African, we are talking about it being one of our best exports. So as we talk about that, we also had an opportunity to see that external factors are to blame. Let me use the word to blame when it comes to the sharing from gotten from the carbon credit. And I would want to speak to a project that was done here in Kenya, and we already highlighted it through a documentary that we had highlighted, and a few emerging stories and stories that have already been published out there, where an entire conservancy and community feels like they have, firstly, they were not well informed of what these carbon markets or carbon credits meant. They got to a place where they signed off the ownership of their land for another organization to come in and stop their way of living or cultural way of living. And then now they were being given what they term as peanuts, or some of them are saying they do not get the equivalent of the share of land that they've given out. And so we are asking, the question that I'm asking or I'm going at is, are we safe to say that these carbon markets would work and the carbon credits would work had there not been any constraints of external market force? In your opinion, Pauline or Adejo? Let's start with Pauline.
I think the carbon markets would work well if the communities were involved more, and starting from the bottom-up approach. When these projects are brought into Kenya or any other country you should start from the community itself. The members are what make the community, and the community are the people that own the land. So if these projects are brought in and the communities are left out, the projects will not prosper in as much as they are meant to prosper. And not involving the community will also bring in challenges of cooperation and trust. And as I have worked with community members, and I have seen how they build the trust with the project owners. And if you do not build the trust with them, they will retaliate, and these projects will fail. Yes, thank you.
Okay, can I
Thank
quickly
you,
chime in?
Pauline. You've actually spoken like a true community person.
Okay, I would like to say, even without any external force, I would like to say there will still be issues without proper infrastructure on how these resources should be dispersed. So if we don't properly set up infrastructure on how grassroots members are going to earn from these initiatives, I don't believe it will work. We will still face the same oil era which Nigeria went through previously. There will still be greedy people and resources will not be dispersed properly. So first of all, we need to set a proper infrastructure on how we intend for the resources to be dispersed down to the grassroots members of the supply chain before we start. Thank you.
And when you talk about infrastructure, in Kenya, I would speak of Kenya, we have had situations where the people who are in charge, and not only on carbon markets matters, but most people who are in charge, you will hear them once or twice say that we conducted participation. But the question here is, was the participation fair? And when I say participation was fair, for example, spelling out how the infrastructure looks like, spelling out how communities are going to benefit from the carbon market gains and the carbon credits that are going to be given out as they give out their lands for the offsetting. And the conversation has it been fair? And when people given an opportunity to get translation of what carbon markets were people given an opportunity to understand that when you give out your land, it's going to take a bit of time before you start reaping? Were people given an opportunity to understand that when you give out your land, which was your livelihood, sometimes you might need to go and look for another livelihood until this land starts gaining the carbon or the gaining into the carbon market, or that fairness in participation? Or is it participation that was, this is a document, tick here, tick here, tick here, and then we go and say that we conducted participation? So that fair participation was one of the things that most communities who were documented or have been documented or have cried foul have mentioned that there was no fair participation. And then now, Adejo, you bring in that we need to first of all start from having this conversation as Africans ourselves. You mentioned that, say for not having, even if we as Africans ourselves. So my question is this: as Africans ourselves, are we really doing that fair participation? Are we making sure, tell them that this is the infrastructure we want to use, this is what we want to set up, this is how we are going to do it? Are we being fair? Are we being accountable in what we are about to gain? Because if we now say that we only need infrastructure, and people may come out and justifiably say, I already did my due diligence, I already went for a participation, whether it was fair, whether it was transparent, that is left to chance. So my question now to you, Adejo, is when you talk about that, can we break it down where we have been and we are missing out? Because I can come and say, I participation.
I think we would have to create a new term, just like greenwashing, for bond credits, so that we can properly identify it. But between now and when we do, I think you are right. Everyone will just, as long as they're operating within the law and they feel they can get away with it. Like I said, just the equivalent of greenwashing. They might claim they do as much as they claim they were, or they might claim they did as much as they wrote in the paper, but when you come and check it and you investigate, it is the opposite. So most times we have to properly get people who are going to investigate and make sure that these values that companies are giving are legit. Thank you. So we don't just need proper infrastructure in place, we also need proper verification infrastructure too in place. Thank you.
Thank you. And when you talk about that, as you clarify your earlier response on infrastructure, I want to already talked about now accessibility to information, and access to information. I think is one of the biggest things. Before you even start arguing about anything, people will want to say, I gave them the information, they were ignorant, or I didn't get the information, nobody brought it to me. So access to information is key. And you've talked about building infrastructure. So Pauline, this is a question that I want to bring out to you, and it is in regards to the youth. So are carbon markets accessible to the African youth driving climate initiatives or innovations? Or are they designed for big players only, so that we can also understand if youth have gotten this access to information, if exactly, and not youth like you, Pauline, who are studying environment, but every youth, rural communities.
Thank you for the question. So the carbon markets are available. In theory, yes, but in reality, they are not really accessible. The reason why I say this because carbon markets or the carbon space is still heavily get kept and controlled by the high high upfront costs and the technical complexity, lack of networks, bureaucracy, and revenue delays. And in Kenya, for example, there are very few youth-led carbon projects registered with global standards like Vera or Gold Standard, and the youths are mostly used for data collection, community engagements, or as faces, but rarely as project owners. And meanwhile, the international organizations swoop in and do uploads in a rural area. They tokenize some trees and bounce with the carbon credits.
Wow.
Yes, thank you.
So sorry, Adejo, you wanted to say something?
No, I was just reacting to it is so
Interesting.
similar to
Yeah.
it is so similar to
Yeah, and I would want to mention.
don't worry, just keep going.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. And I would want to mention what Pauline is talking about, that the youth become the data collectors, and it's an employment for a season. They're given short contracts and paid in wages, and yet we are talking about it are ripe. Let me call it ripe. The carbon in millions of dollars. But then when it comes to the people around who gave out their land and everything else, they are given the brings where the conversation is. When we are doing our research and giving out the snips and the tips and bits or tips and pieces of what exactly carbon markets are, we came across one organization in Zimbabwe called the Kariba project, where they gave out their land, and it went to Red Plus. And after going there, the carbon credits that came out from there was, and out of the 100 million euros, only 14 million euros went back to the communities. And when I say went back to the communities, we are talking about building schools, building dispensaries, so building social amenities and basic places for students and children and community people to live. But then when you look at the bigger picture, if it's 100 minus 14, then you're talking about 76 million euros. Where that money went, there was an discussion of most of the money went to the development and the development of the entire project. And you're wondering, where is the rain beating us as Africans? Who is making these deals for us? Is it because people are not getting the information? It comes to, this is your land, this is how much you're getting, and then they get to position around it, debate and say, I'm going to give out my money or not. Those are the questions that we are asking ourselves this night? And those are the questions that I'm also throwing to you, our audience. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, if you would want to be part of this conversation, just drop your comment on our comment section, and I will be bringing you in shortly. But the real question, the question that I'm asking to Pauline and Adejo this night is, where did the rain start beating us? I know we have some can count on where the rain has beaten us as Africans, but on carbon markets, its inception in the early 2000s, where did we lose the plot? Is it in how we want to include our communities? Is it the middlemen who sometimes may want exactly, or is it the external factors or the national organizations that are beating up the money? I don't know, where did the rain start beating us, Adejo?
Thank you for the question. I will start with saying SDG4, proper knowledge. There's lack of knowledge, technical complexities. People don't know what they are involved in. People don't have an idea what carbon credits are. Information is not properly circulated. So definitely there will be misconstrues, and people will be able to get away with things because they know people are not aware of their rights or what was involved. So as long as there was no one walking into that room with them where the decisions were made, it would be based on need to know basis, and that's what we've been facing since. So I feel if proper infrastructure, like I said, for how carbon credits are going to be calculated, evaluated, and paid can be created, I believe it can be properly dispersed. But if we keep, most of the technical complexities of carbon credits are only known to, like Pauline said, the high-end organizations and businesses who already trade probably internationally and have been exposed to the international markets. But those who are still operating locally and who are just trying to get their feet and who are just trying to stand have no idea, or a lot of recycling companies have no idea what carbon credits are, although they post information about, have no idea what carbon credits are. But there are few who are already reaping the benefits of it, and I believe to those who are already involved, it pays them to stay quiet, but those who don't know anything about it are just making noise about it. But I believe with proper infrastructure on how carbon credits are going to be dispersed, we can finally find a way forward on how grassroots people are going to earn. But without proper infrastructure on how they are going to disperse the carbon credits, it will still be lost under technical complexities and lack of knowledge, and they'll keep getting away with everything. Thank you.
Interesting. Before you jump in, Pauline, you talk about infrastructure, you talk about lack of knowledge, and in my and I, being a devil's advocate, all the organizations that brought carbon market to us as Africa, they would argue and say, we have proper infrastructure. We went there, we did our participation, we spoke to the chief, or we spoke to the headman, or we spoke to someone in the communities, and they told us, yes, you can take our land, or we spoke to the elders. So from their point of view, they might be saying everything is clear because we spoke to who is who in the communities, we spoke to the government, we spoke to everyone else. But on this other end, you're talking about people are talking about, they don't even know what carbon credits are, and yet they're the ones who've been told fenced out of their land. They don't know why this big company came, fenced their land, put up a fence, a gate, and said that you can no longer graze your livestock here. They don't know. They only know that they were told by a representative or something that this is going to give you money. So if from their end, they might argue that we already did our due diligence. So whose responsibility is it really for anyone in Africa to get this knowledge? Anyone in Africa, even in our communities, to get this knowledge? And if once you answer whose responsibility it is, does it then mean that Africans were failing our own? when it comes to giving this information to our people and our community, so that the next time there is participation, they're able to ask the pertinent questions. Whether they'll ask it in their local dialect, that is a conversation for another time, but it should be documented that they asked. So who is failing? Is it us, Africa? Or are we failing because we have also had middlemen in there who are also trying to cash in big at the expense of ignorant communities or communities who don't know what is happening? I don't know. Sometimes as you respond to this, let us not think about the external factors first, but let us think about internally, because they might argue from their end that the infrastructure is clear and it is a clean bill of health, but internally, what happens as Africans? Adejo, if you would want to continue that a bit before Pauline comes in.
Okay, yeah, let me just say a thing. I think, yes, it's still lack of proper knowledge and circulation of proper knowledge about carbon credits that is still making people not know their rights. If everyone knew what was involved, no one would accept less than they deserve. So if proper information can properly be circulated amongst everyone, and just like you said, the question you previously asked, who does it fall on to? Who do I feel it falls on? I believe it falls on us as Africans to educate ourselves and circulate the proper information within ourselves to carry ourselves along so that we don't get left behind by the foreigners. So as long as we can circulate the proper information within ourselves, we stand the chance to fight for our rights together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And as I get back to Pauline, I can see, Pauline, you've switched off your camera. I hope you're still there. I have a question for you. Please switch on your camera so that we can continue. And also, I want to mention that we are still having a challenge bringing in Dixon. He's trying his level best to join in, but then I think there's just a challenge when it comes to his connectivity. I know he had a lot to say when it's indigenous people and communities, as he also works in this community. We are talking about whose responsibility it is or bring understanding to our communities, bring understanding to the rural people, Africans, on exactly what is happening when it comes to carbon markets. The reason why I'm talking about rural people is because Africa's majority live in the rural areas. And it is within the rural areas that we are having these large tracts of land taken up for carbon sinks, as carbon sinks. So it is them that you're talking about. You're talking about them getting this knowledge. People in urban areas might have heard about carbon markets here and there, but then at home or in the rural areas, maybe they just see people come in and put up fences and everything else, as you've said. So whose responsibility is it that we are? That is a question that I'm asking. But then I also want to add it to this. How can tools like GIS, as you study GIS, and digital storytelling expose the gaps between what's promised to communities and what they actually receive? So whose responsibility it is, and then how can we be able to expose the gaps, and then also now speak about what you're promised vis-a-vis what you actually receive from these tools of engagement and information sharing.
Thank you for the question. And I think there are a number of players that are responsible for bringing an understanding to the marginalized communities. There is the number one is the government, especially the national and the county level government in Kenya. These are the ones that are signing the climate deals and enabling carbon projects and setting up frameworks like Kenya's carbon markets activation plan. So the government are involved because they hold legal authority, they approve projects and policies, and they have a duty under Article 35 of Kenya's constitution, the right to access information. And number two are the carbon project developers plus the brokers. These are the people making the money from the forest offsets and land use and carbon schemes. They should be involved because they profit from the projects, they engage the communities directly, and they often bring in the contracts, tools, and data collection. And I think the NGOs, community-based organizations, and civil societies should also be involved because they already have trust and presence on the ground, and they understand the local context, and they can bridge the gap between technical and lived realities. And we also have the youth, because not the youth are also involved in these carbon projects because they get the technical, the politics, and the streets. They can translate carbon talk into real talk, and they can build tools, platforms, and networks to educate from the grassroots up. And with GIS, I think we can map out what is actually on the ground versus what is being said by these carbon projects. And you get like community mapping from projects like demonstrated by initiatives like the Green Belt movement in Kenya helps to pinpoint gaps where promised community benefits are not delivered. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline, as you have also touched on how the youth can actually leverage on storytelling. And I can tell you, we as Square One Eco Africa are on TikTok, yes, TikTok. And if there is a social media platform that has grown so quickly is TikTok. And I can tell you for a fact that the youth, the other generations are on TikTok. So leverage on social media platforms to bring this information to most of our people in our rural areas are in WhatsApp groups, and there's so much sharing of information on WhatsApp groups. So it's also nice for us to continue sharing this information with the people in the rural areas through the WhatsApp groups, through TikTok as a means, because so many people now are spending so much time on their phones, and the internet penetration and the phone accessibility in Africa is above 50%. So we are talking about people having the gadgets to get the information. So we are talking about pushing this information into the social media platforms so that people can be able to get this information as quickly and simply, and kids through storytelling, so that they are able to also understand a bit of exactly what is happening around them, as opposed to being told that we are going to move you from this land and we're going to be giving you a monthly stipend or a monthly income for the land that you've given us. And yet maybe if the land if they were using the land, they would have gotten more. But because they're on a contract, the land is gone and they are left wondering, what do we do? We are talking about what the youth can do, actually, you've talked about largely what the youth can do. This is a question to both of us, Adejo and Pauline. Could indigenous-led models offer better governance for carbon credits, and how do we scale them without losing cultural integrity? Before you answer the question, I would want to mention that out of the research that we did when we were planning this conversation is that most communities felt like their cultural ways had been stopped abruptly. I'll give an example. One of the conservancies, or rather the communities that are based in Kenya and a part of the lands that were taken up by the Northern Rangeland Trust, which there was a court ruling that is still ongoing, and a court ruling that also was for the community members. One of the issues that they were raising was that they were so used to grazing their livestock everywhere because it was community land. And then one day they wake up, it is fenced. And they are told you can no longer graze here because we are trying to regrow the grass, because it's also a soil sink. It's a soil carbon sink. So we are also trying to now give you a roster of how you can be grazing your livestock. And it is their way of living. Now it has been stopped and they don't understand why. And most of them were saying they didn't understand how that one came to being. Yes, they saw a few shillings here and there, but then they didn't understand how that one was came to being. Same replicated in Zimbabwe under the Kariba project. They kept on saying, yes, we gave out our land, but we did not understand exactly the impact that giving out our land would bring to our livelihoods, to a cultural way. So as we think about this question, I also want us to think about how do we then, or can indigenous people lead models and offer better governance for these carbon credits? And how can they scale them without now losing that cultural integrity that they so dearly hold on to? I'll start with you, Pauline, because I think Adejo has switched off his mic, so most probably he might be doing something. Pauline?
Indigenous people make up 5% of the world population, but manage over 80% of the Earth's biodiversity. So I think the indigenous models can not only speed up carbon markets, but also make them actually better. This is because they have proven sustainable land stewardship. Indigenous models are built on generational knowledge of ecosystems because these are the people that have grown up in these lands, and they respect the balance between use and regeneration and community governance. This means that they can implement long-term, low-conflict and ecological sound carbon projects without the flashy consultants and overpriced satellite data.
Yeah, and I would
Yes, I
want to
strongly
add to
agree with
that
Paul.
and say that out of yes, Adejo, same question to you now from a Nigerian perspective. The
Yes,
communities in Nigeria
I
and
strongly
West Africa, if I
I
may.
strongly agree with Pauline. Indigenous people, if we could create a sort of symbiotic partnership between indigenous people and the current existing structure, I believe they will be able to form a symbiotic solution which will last longer than the current one we have on ground. So I believe a sort of symbiotic partnership between both would be best. Thank you.
Yeah, and I also want to agree with both of you that the local communities of the indigenous, let's call them indigenous, as Pauline has, and it is their land that is being taken away. And then, it is them that are understanding how to grow the trees, the ones who will be used to grow the trees when it is carbon sinks from forest. They're the ones who are going to grow the grass or keep away the livestock for the grass to regrow in matters soil carbon sinks. So if they are to be given that ability, or if they are to be given that responsibility of controlling their own carbon credits, I think things would be better for them. If they are able to get rid of the middle person, the middleman, the brokers. Because if we watched a documentary that Square One Africa shared as we were preparing for this discussion, one of the other biggest issues were that there were brokers, people who have told the carbon market or the carbon credit organization that this is this is what is happening on ground, but it is not the reality. The communities now would come and say, no, this is not the reality. And it is a very few number of people compared to the bigger or the larger community. And this is why I would have really loved to have Dixon on board, so that give us a more elaborate look and feel of how the community lands look like and how they feel. So that responsibility being shared and being given to the actual community leaders and community people, community groups, I think it will do better compared to what we are seeing right now with the middleman in there. Pauline Adejo, are you still there?
Yeah.
Switch off your cameras. I wonder or I worry that I've been left alone in this live stream. I welcome comments on our LinkedIn page and live on YouTube. You can ask your question. We'll be sampling them soon. You can put out your thoughts. And we continue with this conversation, and we've talked about having indigenous people or local people take over this responsibility of understanding the carbon credits, how they are measured, how they are calculated, and then now getting the monies that they deserve. And then maybe have a technical person who understands all that. Because one of the other funny things that I watched as I was watching the documentary that I had shared by Dr. Vela is one person holding their phones and going through the calculations and the statistics that are of how to calculate carbon credits. And in my head, I was asking myself, the other person who he was trying to explain to, are they understanding what they're being explained? That this is the amount of carbon that has been sequestrated out of the atmosphere, and this is the amount of money that we can be able to now pay back from the amount of carbon sequestrated out of the atmosphere. So those were the questions that I was asking myself. And I think also...
Yeah, I'm on the line. Yeah, I'll be done.
Sorry, can you hear? Okay, and I think also this is the information that we need to take to the communities. This is the information that community members need to understand before they start signing contracts that are in a technical language, maybe in a language they don't understand. So they're read for and they're told sign here, sign here. I don't know if both of you can hear me because your cameras are off, Pauline and Adejo. If you could kindly switch on your cameras. Yes, thank you, Pauline. Let me come to you before I get to Adejo, because as we also figure out his camera. So Pauline, we've talked about, you've actually now broken it down from a technical point. You've quoted the Constitution on access to information and being a right to each and every person who lives on either land in Africa and globally. And so what are the alternatives, or what is the alternative to everything that we've been talking about? So what does an Africa first carbon market look like when you yourself as a youth and all generations are not just benefiting, but are also decision makers? As you've said, rightfully put, that we need to have an opportunity where we are at the decision-making table. So what are the alternatives and how does it look?
Okay. A first carbon market should have a youth-led design, number one. And number two, it should have equitable transactions. And number three, it should have community ownerships. So on youth-led design, we should engage the youth more on these carbon projects, and they should be empowered to design monitoring, reporting, and verification systems and ensure accuracy and local relevance. These young Africans can build robust tech-driven solutions for monitoring carbon sequestration and reporting data accurately. This local expertise ensures that the monitoring, reporting, and verification systems are culturally appropriate, efficient, and resistant to greenwashing. And for the equitable transactions, the youth should shape transaction terms, ensuring fair distributions of profits that directly benefits communities. This includes setting transparent pricing mechanisms, ensuring fair contracts, and directing a significant portion of the revenue back to the communities undertaking the conservation or restoration work. And community ownership, basically, the project should involve the community members because there is nothing about us without us. Thank you.
Exactly. I can never agree more. And as you said that, I think you have mentioned or you have put rightfully exactly what the communities and what Africa we are missing out when it comes to speaking at the decision-making table, not looking at ourselves as the beneficiaries only, but also looking at it from we are the ones who are making this decision. You've rightfully put that you cannot come and tell us that you are restoring our land, and then you employ me tomorrow, start growing grass where the cattle or the livestock had eaten. I start planting trees where we didn't have any trees. Maybe we had cut them down for timber and other uses. And then you're telling me that I am doing the actual work, but I also cannot make the decision on the actual work. I give you my land, I do the actual work, you pay me peanuts, and then now I can't make a decision of what exactly I'm getting. And then also what you've talked about, the people, the communities, the youth need to understand exactly how this carbon is calculated, what is coming in, and then they get a fair share of what is coming in. So if it is and it is the fair share is being calculated with the work and the land that has been provided. So that calculation is done. The communities understand this is what is happening. This is the calculation. This is the amount of money we might get if all this works out, or this is the amount of money that we've gotten. And since this is the ratio of work that you brought in, the work that you did, the land that you gave us, then this is the amount that you're going to be given. And then now it helps grow and the African communities, and it is going to bring us and lead us to sustainability. So the question of whether carbon markets are working and should work or is a good thing is not a question. Carbon markets are a good thing. And the benefits that are gotten out of the carbon market is what we are questioning. Because had the benefits been working for the actual community person, then I think we would be would develop faster than we are developing right now. We would be more economically empowered than we are right now. We would not be having cases where there is a case in court because this company that has brought in carbon credits is not truthful, or these communities are feeling shortchanged, we would not be having those conversations. Adejo, I want to come to you, and now I want to speak to you from a Nigerian perspective or a Nigerian point of view. So Nigeria launched its emission trading scheme recently. So how do we ensure that there is transparency and prevent elite capture in these trading schemes that were launched in Nigeria? And then also, can you expound a bit on what the emission trading schemes are about? Adejo, if you, I have lost both Pauline and Adejo, but I also speaking to you, our audience, you who is listening to us. I had a question to Adejo, but I think I have lost him. As I recollect my thoughts and my trail of question, I had asked Adejo on emission trading schemes because Nigeria recently launched those trading schemes. But then, Pauline, if you can, as Adejo comes, I would want us to speak about the 2024 carbon market regulations in Kenya. And this is just a question for us to understand and for our audience to understand that we already have a carbon market regulation in Kenya. So genuinely, does it protect communities, or do they formalize exclusion from the carbon markets regulations that we have in Kenya? Pauline, from your research and your opinion. Me?
So carbon markets. I can.
I seem to have lost both Pauline and Adejo. As I wait for them to come. Pauline, you're back? Okay. Could you proceed with the question, or do I repeat it?
No, it's fine.
Mm.
So I think in theory, carbon markets should protect communities, because carbon markets bring income to rural communities while fighting climate change. But in real life, I do not think that is how it goes, because the revenue rarely reaches communities. Communities don't even know if they're part of a carbon project, and the loss of land and sovereignty is also an issue. Um, and their community voices, it's very low in carbon pricing.
Thank you. And I would want to add to that and say that the carbon market regulations, the 2024 carbon market regulations, actually look very good in paper. On paper, they are speaking to every corner, speaking to the community, the landowner, speaking to the carbon credit organization. But the problem comes in when it comes to translating what is on paper to ground. I would speak of this because it's a very, very new regulation. 2024 regulation is a very, very new one. But past experience has taught us that most paperwork or most regulations or most policies continue to gather dust on people's desks and in people's drawers in offices. But when it comes to ground and ensuring that we are working towards making the work, that is where most people draw the line. Those documents, we did them, we launched them, we left them in our cabinets, in our offices. We come to ground with our own new things, or we come to ground with so much technicalities that the people that we come to speak to, the communities that we come to speak with, they don't understand what exactly we are saying. And so misinterpretation and misinformation now gets an opportunity to seep through. And the interpretation and actualization of those regulations now loses meaning when it goes to ground. So what is on paper says one thing, and it might also be protecting the communities that are on ground. But when you come to ground, what is being done and what we are seeing is totally different. It might be because the people who are going to ground have not even read the regulations, do not understand what the regulations are about. And when they go to ground with other information, or they go to ground with so much technicality or so much information that they bombard the communities with that information to an extent where communities are unable to grasp. So the disconnect between what is on paper and what actually happens on ground is quite evident in most policies. So when you talk about, does it genuinely protect communities? But when it comes to interpretation, to work on ground, that is where we lose the plot. Where we lose the plot as the people who have been custodians of these regulations. And so moving forward, I think what we are advocating for in this talk and in other talks is every time we have a regulation that comes out, it has to go back to the people, have the people go through it, understand it, see what is captured, see what speaks to them, see what needs to be redone, and then see how do we now implement every regulation or every policy that we have put down. Say from that and not doing that, I think regulations, policies, and any other paperwork does not mean anything to anyone if it is not being used by the people that it is meant to. So does it protect communities? I believe yes. But is it impacting the communities? I think that is where we have a challenge. Adejo, I don't know if you, and I don't know if, let me check as we wait for Adejo to come back, let me check if there is any question or comment from our stream. And apologies, I think our stream is lagging behind, so it might take a bit of time for me to read or to get a question. So go to our next question. Sorry, my line of thought has been because I've missed. I have one of our speakers has dropped off, and I don't know why. Pauline, I think it's between you and I to continue with the conversation as we also see if we have other people who want to ask questions or have joined in on this conversation. Pauline, I think this is also a question on, I would want you to help us understand greenwashing in a Kenyan context. So we have, or rather we can also have this conversation with our audience as well. What do you think as our audience greenwashing is? And you can also share your comments, share your questions on your thoughts on greenwashing. We will sample them as this live continues. Pauline, a question to you. Kenyans carbon projects genuinely delivering for indigenous communities? I know we've talked about indigenous communities, let us call them rural communities or communities in Africa. So are the Kenyans carbon projects delivering to our indigenous communities, or are they simply new forms of green colonialism and dressed as conservation? And this is based off of the information that you've been able to gather from the stories that you've had, from the communities that you've had, and the complaints that have come off of the communities. So is it another form of green colonialism, or is the Kenyan Carbon Project genuinely going to deliver for these communities, in your opinion and in your view?
So greenwashing. In Kenya, I think greenwashing is like saying we care about the planet while flying private jets and polluting rivers or running fossil fuels ads behind the scenes. But without genuine youth participation and equitable frameworks, carbon markets risk becoming tools for superficial climate heroism rather than delivering tangible, transformative local benefits. This greenwashing allows polluters to offset their emissions without fundamental changes to their practices, often at expense of local communities. And I think we as Kenyans or globally, we can stop greenwashing or spot greenwashing. And they are most carbon projects use vague words like eco-friendly or green or sustainable without data. And there are no independent verifications like credible certifications of these carbon projects or markets. And if we don't do anything about it, such practices can undermine the credibility of carbon markets and perpetuate environmental injustices, turning a potentially powerful climate solution into a mere accounting trick. Thank you.
Wow, interesting that you've talked about turning a potentially great project for Africa into greenwashing scandal. Let me say it. And you've talked about, and this is something that I would want to throw in, and anyone who's watching, if you're listening, if you have a comment or thoughts on it, you can also share on our comment section. There is that carbon credits and carbon markets should not be. And this is the argument. It is giving opportunity to pollute more. We all know that the carbon conversation or carbon sink conversation is clearing the GH, ensuring that we do not destroy our ozone layer further, so that we don't get to a place where we have the actual global warming in its sense. I know it's continuing, climate change is continuing, and we know how to stop it by protecting our ozone, by reducing the GHGs, the greenhouse gases. And the biggest, or rather the biggest greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide or CO2. And this is what we are trying to sink when we're sinking, using trees and using the soil and ground. The argument has been that these polluters, as long as they can be able to purchase carbon credits, they continue to pollute the air to release without the due recognition, or without really thinking about the effects, because, hey, I can be able to purchase carbon. That argument now brings to the fact that we should market the carbon credits because it is feel comfortable in their polluting schemes. And I think to some extent, I agree with that argument, because if we're to continue polluting and to continue producing the GHGs, we are, as long as you have the carbon sinks. But are the carbon sinks absorb the amount of GHGs that are being released by these polluters? That is one question that we need to ponder on. I have carbon offsets that will be able to absorb all these GHGs, all this CO2 that is being released by the polluters. I think that is an open conversation and an open debate that we can have with the audience here on this live, and a conversation that we continue with. So that question lingering in my mind, because I'm wondering, should we be fighting for carbon markets really, and not giving others an opportunity to bigger pollute? That's a question that I'm putting out there to our audience. And to you, Pauline, if you have anything that you'd want to talk about in that regard to carbon market, carbon credit, and carbon offsets.
I
Pauline,
think we should.
would you want in
fight
regard
for
to
carbon
that
markets.
argument?
Yes, and I'm saying we should fight for carbon markets because these are the things that are benefiting us and the community members at large. And if we don't fight for them, then the external factors are going to come and swoop in, and all the benefits are going to go to them. And we, as the third world countries, if I may say so, are going to be lagging behind if we don't fight for our carbon markets.
Yeah, I agree with you, but the question or the argument that was bringing on board is the fact that maybe we would not be fighting for carbon markets as we are, because we are giving the powerful, the superpower organizations, the superpower, no power countries or the global, an opportunity to continue polluting with the disregard of whether the offsets are matching the pollution that is in the global north. I don't know. I think that's just opening another Pandora box, because I don't know if we can ever get the actual response to this. Also owing to the fact that Africa, in the last African that was held in Kenya in 2023, one of the outcomes was that carbon markets, carbon credit is the, and we as a country, Kenya, we have been very vocal and very, we have been leading this carbon markets conversation in Africa, actually. Kenya holding like 296 carbon sinks, and it's the largest carbon market in Africa. So in 2023, we had that conversation, and we said that it is an opportunity for Africa. And there were so many placards that from Middle East, from the United Arab Emirates, where they pledged $50 billion to come in. And with, I'll say, as Kenya, we became tree planters. We've planted trees, but I don't know, for an open conversation for viewers, they never come. That's a question that we're asking. Did the pledges really ever came, or did we stop planting food crops? Continue with their livelihoods to plant trees with no came. And once the trees, the ground has been restored, it's going to fade or not. But to what expense? Is it at the expense of the livelihood, the expense of the livelihoods of Africans? That's also a question that I'm putting out there for anyone who is going to watch or is watching. It's also a question for us to ponder. I think I have lost Adejo, so I think we will call in if you, and before we do, Pauline, I have one more question on the climate. So there is Africa Climate Summit in September, and I know the who is who in climate conversations will be in. Pauline, to you, what would you challenge African leaders to do differently to ensure young Africans are not sidelined in the voluntary carbon market? If you got a chance to ask a question or to speak to these leaders at the Africa Climate Summit in Addis Ababa?
Okay, thank you for the question. And I think the first thing would be to integrate the youth into governance, and the youth must be afforded meaningful and negotiable seats on all the national carbon governance boards, and their direct participation would also ensure that policy frameworks are not only inclusive but also reflect the lived realities and innovative potential of the continent's largest demographic. And this integration is crucial for fostering transparent
Sorry, I think lost
transparent,
Pauline there.
sorry, equitable and
Okay.
effective carbon markets mechanism that genuinely serve African communities. Number two would be to enforce transparent protocols. And I think it is paramount to implement and rigorously enforce clear legally binding land leasing processes, and community consent protocols. And these protocols would be based on free, prior, and informed consent, must respect and protect traditional land tenure rights. They would prevent land grabs and exploitation. And the government should also fund youth driven innovation. And I'm saying this because these enterprises often leverage cutting edge technologies like GIS and digital storytelling tools that are uniquely positioned to provide public, transparent tracking of carbon project outcomes, environmental impacts, and financial payouts to communities. And when we empower these innovators, we can drastically reduce greenwashing and ensure accountability in carbon credit generation. And lastly, the government should also recognize youth led credits to foster economic empowerment and incentivize direct youth participation. Um, I think the African Stock Exchange must be mandated to accept carbon credits generated from certified youth led projects. This would align with recommendations from institutes like African Development Bank, and it would create a direct financial pipeline to young entrepreneurs and community groups who are actively engaged in climate action. And by prioritizing these strategic interventions, the Africa Climate Summit can lay the groundwork for a truly transformative carbon market, one that is equitable, transparent, and driven by the youth dynamic. Thank you.
Thank you, advocate for the youth from the heart. Since you began, have only spoken and widely and articulately spoken, and I agree. We used to be told when we were younger that the youth are the leaders of tomorrow. Now we are in tomorrow, and the youth should be the leaders. And I think this is where we wrap up. Thank you, Pauline, for joining us and for articulately expounding on our topic of discussion, the hashtag to I was speaking about connection problem in Africa. And so sorry about that. Thank my joined us tonight, Pauline Muyodi, who is a GIS and storyteller expert. She's also a student at Kenyatta University studying environment. We had Adejo Panachi from Nigeria, who is an MD of Yama Yama Recycling Company Limited, and also an artist and a curator and a storyteller. We were to be joined by Dixon Nayanoi, who would have given us a very who would have given us a perspective from the communities as he works with the indigenous communities and a community land liaison office, joined by Abiot Yizmu from Ethiopia, who also given us a perspective from Ethiopia. And then the child in Ethiopia, I know he would have expounded further on exactly how that one would technical hitch, but I want to thank all our audience. I want to thank everyone who took time to get into this space and speak with us of our series, The Africa We Must Build, hashtag The Africa We Must Build. Episode was our carbon, our terms. We will continue to update you on the other episodes. Also, I want to apologize to our LinkedIn audience who had clicked live stream, did not pick that link from the LinkedIn side, but we are learning every time. So thank you so much for bearing with us and joining us through our YouTube handle at Square One Eco Africa and through LinkedIn. I want to close this as short quote. So if Africa must be the lungs of the world, then we must design carbon markets that don't suffocate, and we must have bold steps that will not, we must take bold steps now to build a truly Africa first model. That is my quote from me to you tonight. Until next time, thank you so much. Have a good night. Have a good day, depending on where you're watching us from. Thank you.